it is, of course, a must if we are academics that we master these various roles that we have. Being academics, we often, of course, teaching we consider to be main part of our job, and then we have the research that we carry out as researchers. We would also have other work such as consultancy work and knowledge sharing in different other ways. But some important roles that would actually have a significant effect on the quality of research that we produce under our guidance in our institution is these different roles that we as academics play in supervising, reviewing, and examining research. So the effectiveness of these roles will actually lead to quality outcomes of the institute. And also, it will also be part of our portfolio as well, right? When we supervise, we as examiners, when we get a thesis to examine, we also look at who the supervisor is and make judgment. So if we have not done a good job as a supervisor, it will reflect on the students' work and it will come back to us and, sometimes question our abilities and our image as an academic as well. So we have to very carefully play these roles because it will be part of our personal portfolio as well. So we will first look at how to be a research supervisor, an effective research supervisor, again from our experiences over the years, what we think would help. We all know research supervision is not only where when a student comes, you tell them what to do, and if at all have time, sometimes listen to them. If not, we just tell them do this, do this, do this, and they go. Sometimes it can happen when we have a lot of students to supervise as well. But research supervision really entails numerous roles within it. We'll be guiding the students academically. We also play the role of a project manager because we'll actually be managing that research project. We'll also be responsible for skill development of the student in a certain way. And we'll have to also provide them the emotional and professional support, be a mentor. And we'll also have to help them navigate the institutional requirements of the research program. So we will inevitably be playing the roles of a facilitator, a mentor, and a friend as well. So we'll have to keep these roles that we'll have to play in mind when we enter the research supervision role. So being a research supervisor, certain things, like I said, certain points that we try to follow and that we think are important is to remember that effective supervision begins with clarity, not control. So it's not where we try to control this relationship or the student, but we, at the beginning and throughout, be very clear of our expectations, of our style, and of the instructions that we give and the communications that we have with the student. So at the beginning, if we can establish, okay? So at the beginning, if we can establish, especially our expectations, tell them about your style. First, say this is how I work as a research supervisor. Tell them we'll have to meet, how often you plan to meet, whether you prefer to meet physically, online, whether you want them to send text to you or write you emails, whether you want them to have 2 weeks prior notice request of an appointment, or they can just, when they pass by, come and meet you. How long it will take you to give comments. So we tell students, if you want our comments, you'll have to at least give us 2 weeks of notice. Or we can tell them, I will be busy during this period. So if you need any urgent comments, you'll have to let us know beforehand. So like that, this clarity in your expectations and how this relationship is going to proceed is very important. But remember, it's not about controlling anyone or the relationship, but it's about clarity. And then you'll also have to balance guidance with independence. So you need to know when to lead and when to step back. No, yeah, I suppose it has something to do with our culture also. We tend to give instructions a lot when we supervise students. No, sometimes we even say, okay, research in this area. And we sometimes think rather than getting them to, ultimately after a few months come up with a real research problem, it's sometimes easier for us to say, okay, do this and be done with it. But we'll have to somehow control ourselves and not do that. But guide them as to how to find their research problem, where they can read, what they can do, to whom they can speak to. So guide them at the initial stages, especially when the students are trying to identify research problem, the research gaps, problematize, think of a methodology, the guidance might be more prominent. You'll need to give more guidance. But later on, as time passes, when they gain more research skills and when they really get into it, they can be more independent. So just understand where you need to lead and when you need to step back. This is important. And also giving students instructions which are timely and actionable is important. If you just say you need to work on this part, it's very vague, no? Say you read the literature review and you say you need to work on this area. It's vague, but you'll have to be specific in the type of feedback and constructive in the feedback that you give. You can say this particular section in the literature review lacks analytical rigor. It doesn't really critique the literature, but rather state, or you have not read this aspect of this literature. You'll need to read more on this part. Like that, you need to be very specific, and also you'll need to give timely feedback. So you cannot take a whole lot of time to give feedback. This is where your early agreement as to when the student should expect feedback from you matters. So we generally, all of us have this experience where the students will send their work for evaluation sometimes the day before the submission. And they expect us to, be up the whole night and correct their work and send it to them quickly. So, you have to beforehand communicate to them that doesn't happen. You'll need a week. So if they don't send it by that time, you might not be able to give as comprehensive feedback as expected. So, so that has to be established, but giving feedback that is constructive and timely is and actionable is important. And also this relationship that you have with the supervisor plays a big role. It has to be supportive and especially respectful. We are all supervising adults. It's not kids, and even with kids we have to be respectful, of course, but especially adults expect a certain amount of acceptance and respect. I had this experience where a research student of a master's program of ours contacted me. He was a friend of my husband, so he contacted me and said that the supervisor he was appointed to is being very rude towards him and is very negligent of what he says. And he was very disheartened. He was about to give up the whole degree, the master's. He was in the final stage of doing the research. He was from a private sector organization doing a very well, a very good job and a very respectable individual. And I couldn't imagine when he said how he was treated. I was really surprised. Those are some of the reasons why we wrote this book also. We were surprised to hear that, some of us actually treat research students like that. So we have to be very mindful that we are dealing with another student's life. For them, it's very important work that they are doing. And for us, it might be another student, but we'll have to come out of that. And even the most negative feedback, you can give in a very respectable way. So that respectable relationship, supportive relationship really helps. I remember with my doctoral and my master's supervisors, how supportive they were. I was a young lecturer starting my family and having, small kids, and I had various issues. And both those supervisors, both are not no more now, but they were so supportive. So even though I had these other issues going around me, that relationship gave me a lot of hope and encouragement. And now thinking back, happiness and lot of respect for my two supervisors. So because they were very respectful, they understood my struggles, and they took them into consideration. So this is something that we can think about. And also be reflexive. Always see, is there anything that I can improve to make this a better relationship? Sometimes we all know our students can be of different personalities. Their ways can be different. For some people, we might have to be very, very entertaining and polite. For some, we might even have to be a bit tough. Being tough does not mean you are not respectful. Those are two different things. Tough, being respectful. So you will need to sometimes understand the style of the research student also, and reflect on what will work, what will not work, and accordingly adjust yourself as well. Yes, and then to talk about the examiners, as examiner, what you would do, Tarusha would take over.
So continue from supervision, another key aspect that we as academics are entrusted with being examiners to research students. So with so many programs out there within your own institute and others, there are many instances that we get invitations to evaluate to research students' work. So one thing is we have to clearly understand the requirements. So obviously there are differences among undergraduate versus postgraduate. So we cannot evaluate an undergraduate thesis in the same level with the same expectations as a postgraduate. So we need to be very realistic in terms of what we are really evaluating. The time duration students have, for instance, is it 6 months, 1 year, 2, 3 years? So those things, all those factors have to be taken into consideration in our evaluation. So that's about the realisticness, because especially as soon as you complete a particular degree, let it be master's or doctoral, and you get into the shoes of an evaluator, you become much more stricter. We've seen that happening to a lot of people because you have done, once you've done a very good study, you expect so much from the students as well. But if you are fresh after a doctoral study, you can't keep that mindset when you are evaluating a undergraduate or a master. So be very cautious about the level, undergraduate, master's, doctoral, duration they have to do the research, because everyone is working within time constraints. So you have to be realistic. What can the student realistically do within the time allocated for the research? And also in terms of a degree program, especially undergraduate and masters, there are a number of credits allocated that also has to be taken into account when you are doing your evaluation. So these are number of factors that you need to consider. Then it's not about going easy, because you need to actually do justice to the qualification and the degree awarding body. Because the person has to ultimately live up to the qualification. You say the person has graduated with this, earned a master's, earned a doctoral degree. So finally that should get reflected in the person itself. Therefore, it's not merely giving a good grade, giving a mark for on sympathetic ground. You are being fair to the qualification and of course to the institute as well, because the quality of the Institute also gets reflected with the outputs, the people who are earning qualifications from that institute. So all those things have to be borne in mind and be on time. So when you are, rather than just accepting all the invitations that comes your way from many, many institutions, you need to also think, can I do a good job? Can I do a justifiable job within this duration? Again, that's a balance that you have to strike, because we have I'm sure it's here also, so many students and we have limitations in number of staff. Then you can't say no also, because especially undergraduate masters and all, you have to support the institute, you have to support the program. So you need to, of course, accept evaluations, but which ones you accept should be a very well thought out decision. Maybe things which are close to your domain or your methodological expertise, etc., you can take on board, because then your evaluation is more fair on the student. Because if you're not really an expert on it, maybe the certain questions that you raise or the concerns you have may not be really justifiable as well. So you need to think about your expertise and submitting evaluations on time. Because if you don't submit the evaluation on time, you are actually delaying the maybe career progression of a student or next phase of life of a student. So it can be just one evaluation, but it's the whole life of the student. So you need to take very seriously about doing a good job with your evaluation as well as submitting on time. Then in the process, there are several questions you need to ask yourself. How do I examine the thesis? Especially if you are new to it, you have to spend more time as you develop expertise, as you become more familiar with the program. Presumably, you can you might be able to do a little quicker, but still, we sometimes find one uninterrupted day and like the whole day we engage in it and leave it aside and again come to it after a day or two, because sometimes one day is not enough, even if you have one whole day. So you need to actually devote quality time, know the focus, especially if it's an undergraduate, is it a basic research or applied research? Master's, is it a thesis or a research paper? That difference. Then at the doctoral level, is it a PhD or a DBA? So all these, there are subtle differences even at the same level. So you need to really understand the focus of the degree, and that should be really kept in mind when you are doing the evaluation. Then of course you'll be guided by a criteria. When you are given the evaluation, the coordinator, head of department will send the criteria. So to be fair by all the other students who are also part of this program, you need to really base your evaluation on the criteria. You need to read. You can't do a haphazard job. Of course, sometimes with time, you might be able to spend the limited time on it. That's why we said you have to make a very thought out decision whether you can really do it or not. So you have to read the entire thesis. Sometimes you might need to read several times certain parts of it, and be fair, because it's finally students' effort, students' life. You need to be very cautious about that. Handle with rigor and empathy. So it's a fine balance. On one hand, you have to do a very rigorous task. So you have to make sure that your evaluation is very rigorous so that it is fair for the institute, fair for the student, and the student can really live up to the qualification. As well as you shouldn't be too hard. You can't be unrealistic. You can't think, okay, you expect so many things within a study, or you expect at a master's level, you expect a doctoral level standard, or undergraduate level, you expect a master's level standard. So you have to be empathetic about the process, especially if the student is a doctoral student. And you remember the diagram, the iceberg, etc. we showed you. So the realities of doing the doctoral research, the process followed and would have been under a supervision. So you need to understand those things and be empathetic as well. Then about drafting an examiner's report, especially more than for undergraduate, for masters and doctoral, this becomes a very important um, uh, point. And what goes into your examiner's report, how it's crafted, can really be a very much a facilitative thing for a student. Especially, you should not look at it as a fault finding mission. It's not an opportunity to show how knowledgeable you are, how powerful you are, how much you know, and how little the student knows. That's not the aim at all. It's an opportunity to really understand what the student has done. If you really see opportunities for improvement, help the student point out those areas for improvement with reasons, with justifications. Don't make your comments vague saying needs improvement. Student doesn't know what to improve. You have to be very specific and be constructive. Sometimes we've seen uh, certain examiners giving references to certain papers, giving specific theories, etc., very detailed guidelines, which can be very useful for students to improve the thesis and presumably to develop future publications out of the thesis. So bear that in mind, being specific and constructive. And depending on the program, you may be called for a viva. So also remember, when you are accepting the examination, that may also be a requirement. So if it is in a geographically distant place, you might need to inform the coordinator about how you can join remotely, etc. And then what's your role at the viva, whether what is the institution's policy, who else is there, what they expect, all that has to be also talked about, and you need to be clear about those considerations in terms of the viva. So overall, it's important that you take the job of an examiner very seriously, because next to supervision, that's a very important thing that you will be doing for a research student. So eventually, continuing from supervising students, then examining, and then helping them to further develop their work. And then, of course, the next step will be about publications. So as an academic, that's another role that we may need to step into, a very important role, being reviewer by facilitating quality publication. So as the saying goes, reviewers are quality controllers in the world of research. So don't take that role as an unimportant thing. It has to be taken very seriously. It's a very important role. So remember, you are, as a reviewer, you have really a kind of a authority to see what's going out there as knowledge in your domain and in a particular journal. That's very serious responsibility. So you need to take that with that light. So sometimes people just taking it as an opportunity, every review that comes your way, people accept. I'm not saying to reject, but you have to make a very cautious decision, thought out decision, whether you can really do justice. Personally, I mean, if I feel that it is totally out of my expertise in terms of domain of course, methodology, domain of course, when it's generally management, I suppose we all can fit in. But especially in terms of methodologically, if you feel it's not really up to your expertise, it's only fair that you don't take on such opportunities, because it can be really unfair in terms of the comments you give and also doing justice to such a publication. And keeping in mind the ranking of the journal. So sometimes we see, especially if you are a new reviewer, you are really very eager to do a good job. Of course, we need to do a good job, and you may want to put in, all what you know to that review. You put all the comments, ideas you have, and even if it's a conference paper, you might kind of review it like A or A star journal. So you need to bear in mind, in a conference paper, the level expected is much lesser, because you are trying to, give opportunity for people to present get feedback and improve. But in A rank, A star journal, there is lot of very limited publications, many submissions. So only the cream of the cream of papers would get accepted. So you need to bear in mind the particular ranking of the journal. So your review has to be in line with that particular ranking level and the journal. You have to be familiar with the journal as well to do a good job. And don't take it lightly, just review something. That's why I said if you are not having the proper expertise, it's not a good idea to review such a journal paper, because your work, your research capability, your quality of work also get reflected through the review, the words used, the terminology, the tone expressed, all that conveys it. Therefore, the editors also judge you who you are as a researcher through the review that you do. Sometimes we have seen personally, there are certain papers, the earlier paper I mentioned about the student supervisor perspective, while we started somewhere, the paper took a different direction, learning from a reviewer comment. So all in all, we have seen certain papers significantly improving through the review process. So something you need to remember is when you are reviewing, you can't contradict your own comments. So if you say something earlier, that has to flow through. And if you say something in an earlier round of review, again in the next round, you can't ask for something totally different. So there has to be consistency. Few questions, especially, I mean, some of you may have had a lot of experience in reviewing, others may be starting the process new. Especially if you're new to reviewing, something you need to remember is you need to start from at a particularly lower level, presumably a conference paper review, because the level, the standards expected would be less than a high rank journal, because it's more of a facilitation that you are enabling a research student to present their work. And also when it comes to journals, start with a familiar journal, a journal that you have published. Then you know the conversations going there, and with your own publication experience, you know their expectations, you know their levels, etc. So that makes your life easy, especially if you have published before. And also a journal that you're conversant in terms of the conversations going on in terms of the earlier articles that have been published. So if you have read, again, you understand the quality, the expectations, etc. So always start on a very familiar footing. Later on, of course, if the particular paper is something you feel you can contribute, you can, of course, review. But when you start, familiarity makes your life easier, and that will give confidence, because that will help you to do a good job, and that will give you confidence for your future reviews as well. So how to decide? As we say, think about your expertise, because after all, you need to do a good job. That's going to have far-reaching implications about what gets published in your domain, and also the message you convey whom you are as a researcher to the wider academic community, to the editor. And again, just don't say no to everything as well. So again, it's a fine balance. We have to, journals, sometimes we feel bad. There are instances we say no when we are really held up with many work. But certain journals, especially where I have read and I have published, you feel obliged. So I also accept so much more to review as well. So you need to strike a balance, not to overcommit and, do a kind of a haphazard job, but also help the journal, help the scholarly community. Then how to perform an effective review? As I said, sometimes you may have had the experience where you've got pages of review comments. That's what I think Cicely was referring to. That's one challenge as a researcher we face when we have how to address reviewer comments. On the other hand, if you don't get details, then you don't know how to improve. So you need to make sure that you strike a balance in terms of the ranking of the journal, etc. Uphold rigor, You have to maintain the rigor of that journal, the domain. So do justice to the academic community. Be balanced, as we always say, the tone you used, even in feedback, Arusha will talk about. The wording you use, start with more positive, more encouraging comments. Convert those negatives as areas for improvement. How you can kind of improve the paper by taking particular points, but be very specific how you could improve. And of course, timely. You know the pain, how much we need to sometimes wait for months and months. As I was telling about one paper, more than 5 months now after submission, no news. So think about yourself, put yourself in the author's shoes, and try to give a timely review so that you're facilitating timely publications as well as doing justice to the author. And when you write a review report, as we earlier mentioned, be very constructive. It's not a fault-finding mission, and it's also unethical. We see some instances, people, they are giving their papers and saying, so notably, some important papers are missing, and they give reference to their paper. So that's not an ethical practice by any. There is particularly a paper that you have written is relevant, you may include, but it's not a thing that you should be doing in a very conscious manner. If so, you have to include with others. Otherwise, it's like you're self-imposing as a means to increase citations with a future publication. So you need to be ethical in your review in that way, and consistent. Now sometimes we have seen papers that I told, after 5 rounds, the paper got rejected. So every time you need to give hope. The paper which I told about supervisor student, that was one paper we had a very positive experience. Actually, it's a B rank journal, and we went through about 4 rounds of review. But at every round, there was some encouragement coming from the reviewers, acknowledging improvement. They told further things. So they never went easy on us. They asked for more and more, but it was in a very encouraging tone while acknowledging the earlier work. So across 1.5 years of time, we improved and it got published. So it takes time. So that's not the very top end. Still, it takes time. So you need to be consistent, constructive, and finally help out the researchers, and you're doing your part to the discipline. So with that, I'll hand over to Arosha to talk about feedback.
So this is the final sort of section that we'll talk about. So in all these roles that we spoke about, being a supervisor, being an examiner, being a reviewer, there's a big part of giving feedback, no? So we believe that you can either make or break a research student with the way that you give feedback also. So it's not only the type of feedback that you give, but the way that you give feedback. So we believe that the feedback that you give needs to be, of course, constructive, critical, all of that, but given in a very supportive manner. So provide feedback that are relevant, constructive, timely, and context sensitive. So when we say relevant and constructive, so you need to be mindful of what the feedback that you are required to give. So if you are evaluating a conference paper, then the feedback that you give cannot be at a level of a journal paper. Or if you are evaluating C rank journal, a paper, it can't be at the level of a rank journal paper. So you need to be mindful about the relevance of the context, and also whether you are giving the relevant feedback, constructive feedback, or everything under the sun. So think of this relevance, think of the context, and compassionate. Honesty is also important. Be compassionate, be empathetic, we've also gone through this process. So I shared this experience of a person going out and crying. We've seen a lot of students cry like that. Sometimes when we are too nice, also people cry, but be mindful that they would have gone there, they would have had their challenges. We don't know what context they are coming from, how hard they have worked on. This is not to say that, don't give feedback, negative feedback, or to say that don't be too critical. You can be critical as you want, but the manner that you give the feedback, be compassionate about it. And this we believe in. Feedback should challenge the research, but not crush the researcher. So it again is related to being compassionate. And the words you use can have a much more negative impact than you think. So some questions to ask. How to provide feedback. So the way that you provide feedback as a supervisor is different to how you provide feedback during progress reviews or oral examinations. How to provide feedback at a research conference is different. Remember the time that you have. Sometimes we've seen in a research conference, you'll be giving feedback. You've only been given 10 minutes for feedback. So we all know how in a conference we are on a tight schedule. So 10 minutes maybe for the paper presentation and 10 minutes for the feedback. And then the next presenter will have to come. And then there'll be 3 panelists to give feedback. So then you have to be mindful of the time, mindful of the organizers of the event. So select the most important one feedback. Maybe you see 10 things that you need to give feedback on, but this is a conference paper and one main feedback might be important to the person. And maybe something the other person said, you don't have to reiterate again. Or you can say, okay, this is the main one. I have also made notes of some other feedback I would like to give. Maybe I'll share that document with you. I'll give it to you when we have a break after this. So you can, if you have gone through the paper before and have other feedback, you can certainly give it in different other ways. But what I'm trying to say is be mindful. But if it's now say a thesis examination, you would also have gone through the thesis, have made detailed comments. But in the oral viva, you don't have to give everything. Sometimes we see hours on end, people talk about the commas missing in page number 5 to reference being wrong in page number 80 to 100 to whatever. So you can say, I have written all of that, these other corrections, language and grammar. I have made corrections in the document. You can look at it later. But the main concern I have in this research is this. So the main ones, depending on the importance, you can raise. So be mindful of these factors when you give feedback. So how your feedback, the way that you give feedback, the time that you take to give feedback, and the type of feedback that you give will be different in different forums, even though you are the evaluator for all of these. So these are what we thought are important, and especially how you give feedback. Don't be rude, be professional, be understanding, be nice, but at the same time, be critical. Again, I'm reiterating, don't crush the researcher, but rather help the person to improve. Finally, whether your work is as a research student or as a examiner, evaluator, supervisor, remember that all of your hard work will pay off soon. Stick with what you are doing, no matter how hard it gets. And with that, we'll stop. So we hope that you got at least a few points from our experience, our work in these different roles. And we wish you all the best. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.